realized that Caonabo was allied to most of the caciques on the island. He was a main player. And so what was the solution? They had to take him out of the game. He was also in a strategic position. He was the cacique in the very middle of the island. He was el señor de la Maguana. So they saw how several of the other caciques came to Caonabo's aid. They saw Guayacoa, Guarionex, and Beecho. He also had several chiefs in command. One of them was Alcuanex, but his most famous general was called Uxmatej, here also expressed as Uxmatex. He was a Taino, and it is said that he was the captain or the general of Caonabo's army. Oviedo says that he was cross-eyed and that they commanded thousands of men. Oviedo says of Uxmatex, el cual era visco o bisojo, y era tan valiente hombre que le temían todos los otros caciques e indios de la isla. Caonabo and his allies took advantage of all of the crazy stuff that was going on between Colón and his men or his crew. They were constantly rebelling, so these fortresses were constantly being abandoned. Caonabo took advantage of that, and he attacked several times. Through the strength of his allies, Caonabo let all of the indigenous people on the island know, you cannot ally yourself with these people that have arrived. If you do, there's going to be consequences. This resulted in the indigenous people fleeing anytime they saw any of these people coming around. They did not want to get Caonabo angry. They knew he meant business. Caonabo had visited Fort Isabela several times, supposedly to become friends with Colón. But as Pedro Martí de Angleria writes, the Spanish heavily suspected that he was feigning friendship, but that he had the true design, which our men suspected, of seeing how he might best attack and destroy it as he had done to the town of La Navidad. Alonso de Ojeda had first tried to convince the cacique to make a pact of friendship with Colón. Pedro Martí de Angleria says that at first conversation seemed to flow. However, because Ojeda was such a hothead, he ended up threatening Caonabo with the massacre and ruin of his people if he would choose war rather than peace with the Christians. Ojeda designed a very interesting plan, something completely different than just battling on a battle. Bartolomé de las Casas tells us what happened. He says that Alonso de Ojeda left with about 9 or 10 Spanish, and he went to visit Caonabo in his CACIQUE. But of course, the first time he arrived, they all scattered. There was no negotiation. Alonso went several times, and he would yell into Caonabo's yucayeque, hey, we just want to talk, this is peaceful, yada yada, and trying to convince the cacique to come out to meet with him. They had learned enough about the indigenous beliefs that he took with him a pair of basically chains or handcuffs that he then presented to Caonabo and told them, these are ture. Ture meant sky or heaven to the Tainos, but it also meant any metal object that they believed came from ture was also called ture. So the metal itself was called ture. So after several tries, Alonso de Ojeda was able to convince Caonabo to meet at his cane. During this meeting, he showed Caonabo these handcuffs. He told him that these chains were used by the Guamiquimos in their areit. Alonso de Ojeda took his time to convince el cacique Caonabo to allow him to place upon his wrists these beautiful chains that supposedly were worn by the king and queen of Castile. Ojeda called these items Ture de Vizcaya, or celestial jewels of Vizcaya. We don't know what this man eventually said to finally convince him to put these things on. But Caonabo made a ceremony out of it. He went towards the river. All of the men with Ojeda, the other 9 or 10 men that were with him, went to the river with him. And Caonabo cleansed himself. He washed himself in the river before allowing these handcuffs to be placed on him. Ojeda also carried his horse. So he told Caonabo that the kings and queens of Castile would wear these beautiful jewels while riding on a horse. So Ojeda got on the horse. He helped Caonabo get on the back of the horse. Once he was securely on the horse, they put the handcuffs on. The men were giddy with excitement, but they held it in. They didn't want to alert the king and his queens because they not only captured Caonabo, they took all of his wives and children with him too. So to make it seem like nothing was happening, they went around close to the CACIQUE a couple of times, everybody walking very slowly, very nice. Slowly, they went farther and farther away. Eventually, they got far enough away that they then tied up his wives, his children, and headed back to La Isabela.